Now I need to ask you, do you have CRP on your land, and are you considering putting ag land into CRP this year? Are you actually renewing your CRP program? And if you are, I wanted to discuss the dangers of CRP and just something I see when I travel around the country and I see the consistency of this and I see these consistent dangers. Now, it's not that the CRP program is a bad program, but you need to learn how to manipulate the program to fit for wildlife and whitetails, and possibly even consider not enrolling your land into CRP. And again, it goes back just kind of like quality timber. If you have to put your land into CRP, or if you have to put your timber into a managed forest law program, or if you have to manage that hardwoods for timber dollars and it's actually hurting your wildlife and whitetail potential, then what I would suggest is actually finding a new parcel, a smaller parcel. Sometimes people think they have to have this giant parcel, but then they have to enroll their land into these programs that ultimately hurt them for whitetails and wildlife. I encourage you to shrink your land size or maybe come up with another plan. CRP is a program where you can set aside ag land, existing ag land, and then get a return on that for your taxes, and it can be a significant tax savings. So in some places, people you can't afford not to do it. And then again, I'd consider a different land if that was possible. And the reason why is because CRP and the mixes they put into your CRP and what you're supposed to plant will typically not hold wildlife, especially in more northern settings where this grass, and you can see behind me, 20, 30 feet behind me and quite a ways back, all that cover lays down during the entire hunting season, or most of the hunting season, so it provides no cover or no wildlife value to small game or whitetails. And that's where the problem comes in with CRP. I was at a 42-acre parcel, or a parcel, it was actually 140 acres, but 42 of that was enrolled in CRP. Now, they did have some briar patches coming in, they had some trees growing. It's in the last year, so they haven't managed it, they haven't cut it, which is a good thing, so it's starting to hold some wildlife in some small pockets. But for the majority of that 42 acres, it's dead for wildlife all hunting season long and then all winter. They cannot have a sustainable population of pheasants, for example, or rabbits out in those, because the grass ultimately lays down and the weeds, goldenrod, ragweed, flowers, different types of big bluestem, little bluestem, Indian grass, whatever's in that mix, it lays down all fall and winter long, or mostly all fall and winter long. And those creatures that would be otherwise living there or that were attracted there for cover have to leave and find cover, find food, find shelter somewhere else. And typically there's not cover anywhere else. So then they just die. There's nowhere else to go for them. And there's not a sustainable population. That's a pattern that I see on CRP fields, especially ones that are maintained and clean and free of shrubs and trees that are growing in briars. And if it's kept clean, it looks great during the summertime, then it lays flat during the fall, and it's not helping those clients for wildlife and whitetails. It's an example of, I talk about in another video about the science and, great science that applies to big parcels. That's bad science for small parcels. Well, this is just bad science when it comes to whitetails and wildlife. Now, I have seen properties where those clients, whether it was legal or not, I'm not sure. You'd have to look at their plan. But they're buying the CRP mixes, they're getting rid of most of the CRP mix, and they're replacing it with switchgrass. At least the switchgrass stays up all fall, winter long in those areas, and it can provide cover to pheasants. In fact, they have sustainable wildlife populations of pheasants. If you can plant patches, pockets of switchgrass, that same 42 acres, I've instructed them to plant about 30 strips of switchgrass in there, long strips, 30 to 50 yards by 20 to 30 feet wide. So they can not only have cover for whitetails, it can actually hold out in that CRP field now. And then of course we're adding food plots out there. They're probably not renewing their CRP, so don't get excited on that. But they're putting food plots out there, they're edging their food plots in switchgrass, and they're ultimately going to be able to explode their whitetail and wildlife populations on that property by not having it in a pure CRP blend. Because there's actually edge during the fall and winter, there's actually cover, and that cover does not diminish so that those creatures have nowhere to go. Consider CRP, it's a great tax benefit, but as it applies to holding wildlife and whitetails, be very cautious. I think you've heard me talk about the 20-acre example in Minnesota a couple years ago, where the whole bottomland is in a CRP program. Their whole intention was purely wildlife. They get enrolled in CRP. The cover lays down by November, December, going in through all winter. There's no cover. There's no creatures in there. When we go out there in February, there's no cover. There's no cover there during the hunting season, and they almost felt like they were duped. You know, because CRP is a wildlife program, right? It creates more wildlife on your property, and most of the time that couldn't be further from the truth. So I want you to consider, if you're re-enrolling, if you're thinking about enrolling current ag land, what are some other options that you can do? Can you put switchgrass into that CRP program? Can you create pockets of CRP in there of switchgrass? Switchgrass is the only true grass for whitetails and wildlife. Everyone talks about the diversity. You need a diversity of grass, but grass is grass. Conifers are conifer. That's not diversity. Diversity is grass, conifers, broadleafs, shrubs, hardwood regeneration, flowers, legumes. That's diversity. That's an upland mix. That's like the perfect wildlife blend, but that's not the blend you're going to get when you enroll your land in CRP. So consider other options, considering if you can legally manipulate the CRP to slant it more towards whitetails and wildlife. Work with your local wildlife resource professional, see if there's other options that you can do for actually managing CRP or not managing CRP for the benefits of yourself and the local wildlife populations.